In 1934, a Kentucky coal miner's wife fed her family of 9 on a nickel's worth of beans a day. Not once a week, every single day. Number 7 on this list was the meal that did it. Number 3 has almost completely vanished. And number 1 fed more poor Americans than any government program ever did. These 25 bean dinners kept a nation alive. Then we got rich and threw them away. Hit that subscribe button and let us count down the 25 forgotten poor man bean dinners our grandmas made for pennies. Number 25, bean and bacon soup. Long before Campbell's put it in a red and white can, American mothers made bean and bacon soup from a handful of dried navy beans and the fatty ends of a bacon slab that the butcher sold for almost nothing. You soaked the beans overnight, then simmered them with chopped bacon, a diced onion, a rib of celery, and a can of tomatoes until the whole pot turned thick and smoky and pink at the edges. A pound of navy beans cost about a dime in 1950. The bacon ends were often free if you were friendly with the man behind the counter. For a family in a Pennsylvania mill town, this pot was Monday supper, Tuesday lunch, and the smell that met the children when they came in from the cold. The canned version that replaced it was convenient, sure, but it never had that depth, that slow-built richness of real bacon fat melting into beans over a whole afternoon. We paid a company to forget how to make it ourselves. Number 24, cold 3-bean salad. This was the dish that showed up at every church potluck, every summer supper, every funeral spread from Ohio to Alabama. A can of kidney beans, a can of green beans, a can of wax beans, all drained and tossed with sliced onion in a dressing of vinegar, a little oil, and a spoonful of sugar. Then it sat in the icebox overnight while the beans drank up the tang. A woman could make a giant bowl of it for under 50 cents and feed 20 people at a reunion. What made it genius was that it did not spoil in the heat the way a mayonnaise salad did. It sat out on a folding table in August and only got better. For a senior living alone, a batch of 3-bean salad lived in the refrigerator for a week and gave you a cold, bright, ready meal every time you opened the door. No cooking, no fuss. Today we buy sad little tubs of it at the deli counter and never once think to make our own. Number 23, butter beans with a ham hock. Down south, they never called them lima beans. They were butter beans, and they earned the name. Big, flat, pale green beans simmered slow with a smoked ham hock until they turned soft and creamy, and the pot liquor thickened into something you wanted to drink straight from the bowl. A bag of dried butter beans cost about 15 cents in the 1950s. The ham hock was a scrap the butcher nearly gave away, all bone and skin and smoke. 2 hours on a low flame, and it surrendered everything it had. Served over a scoop of white rice or beside a wedge of cornbread, this was a full plate that cost almost nothing. Grandmothers in Georgia and the Carolinas made it on wash day because it minded itself on the back burner while they hung the laundry. You did not stir it. You did not fuss over it. You just let the beans and the bone do their quiet work until supper. Number 22, bean patties. Nothing got thrown out in a Depression kitchen, and that included yesterday's beans. When a pot of pintos or navy beans was down to the last cup, Grandma mashed them with a fork, cracked in an egg, added a handful of cracker crumbs or cornmeal, and a little diced onion, and shaped the whole thing into patties. Then she fried them in a hot skillet with a spoon of bacon grease until each side turned deep golden and crisp. What went into the pan as leftovers came out as dinner? The outside crackled, The inside stayed soft and savory, and a squeeze of hot sauce or a smear of mustard made it taste like something you meant to make on purpose. A plate of bean patties cost pennies because the beans were already paid for. This was the everyday poor man's croquette, and it turned the sad end of one meal into the proud beginning of another. We call it reducing food waste, now like it is a new idea. Grandma just called it Thursday. Number 21. Homemade molasses baked beans. Before beans came sweet and gummy in a can, New England families baked their own in a heavy pot from Saturday morning straight through supper. Dried navy beans went into a bean crock with a chunk of salt pork, a good pour of dark molasses, a spoon of mustard, and an onion pushed down into the middle. Then it went into a low oven and cooked for 6, 7, 8 hours until the beans turned mahogany brown and the sauce got thick and dark and just barely sweet. A pot like this cost about 30 cents to make and fed a family for 2 days. It was the traditional Saturday night supper, served with brown bread, while the woman of the house rested on the one night she did not cook fresh. The long, slow bake gave the beans a flavor no factory can copy. That deep molasses richness, that little bite of mustard, that soft salt pork falling apart at the edges. The can gave us convenience and took the soul right out of the dish. Number 20, kidney bean goulash. Call it goulash, call it slumgullion, call it whatever your family called the meal that used up whatever was in the house. A pound of kidney beans, a box of elbow macaroni, a can of tomatoes, an onion, and if you were lucky, a quarter pound of ground beef to give it body. Everything went into one pot and simmered until the macaroni was tender and the beans and tomatoes had melted into a thick red stew. The beans were the trick. They stretched the tiny bit of meat until a family of 6 ate like there was plenty. This showed up on tables across the industrial Midwest, in Detroit tenements and Chicago walk-ups, in kitchens where payday was still 4 days away. It cost under $1, and it fed everyone twice. The leftovers thickened overnight and tasted even better the second day when the macaroni had soaked up all that tomato and bean broth. It was never fancy. It never tried to be. It just made sure nobody at the table went to bed hungry. Number 19, creamed beans over biscuits. Here was the bean version of the meal soldiers ate on toast. Grandma took a cup of cooked white beans, mashed about half of them to thicken things, then loosened the whole pot with a little milk and butter or bacon drippings until it turned into a warm, creamy gravy. She poured it steaming over split biscuits or a slice of toast, cracked black pepper on top, and called it supper. It cost almost nothing because the beans were already in the pot and the biscuits were made from flour, lard, and buttermilk that lived in every southern pantry. What it gave back was comfort. That soft, mild, starchy richness that sat warm in your belly on a cold night. For a family that could not afford meat that week, creamed beans over biscuits still felt like a real hot, sit-down meal. It filled the plate. It filled the house with the smell of baking biscuits. And it filled the gap between one paycheck and the next without anyone feeling shorted. Number 18, succotash. The word comes from the Narragansett people who were cooking beans and corn together on this continent centuries before anybody thought to write a recipe down. By the time our grandmothers made it, succotash was lima beans and corn simmered gently with a piece of salt pork and just enough water to bring it together. The salt pork gave the two humble vegetables a smoky, fatty depth that made them taste like far more than they were. A bowl of it cost pennies. Lima beans were about $0.10 a pound. Corn came from the garden or a nickel can, and the salt pork was already curing in the cellar. In the South, a plate of succotash and a wedge of cornbread was the whole supper. In New England, the same idea showed up with a different bean and a different name. Every region had a version, because everywhere in America there were families who needed to turn 2 cheap vegetables into a meal. Today it shows up once a year at a summer cookout and nowhere else. Number 17, stewed shell beans. In the fall, mountain families in Appalachia picked their beans late, after the pods had swelled, fat, and streaky. These were shell beans, October beans, cranberry beans, whatever your holler called them, and you shucked them out of the pod by hand while sitting on the porch in the cool evening. Then they went into a pot with a piece of fat back and cooked low until they turned soft and the broth ran thick and speckled. Fresh-shelled beans cook faster and creamier than dried ones, and for a few weeks every autumn, a poor family ate like royalty on beans that cost nothing but the labor of shelling them. Children sat in a circle and shucked while the grandmother told stories, and the beans went from pod to pot to belly all in one afternoon. It was food, and it was family time, and it was the whole rhythm of a mountain autumn folded into one bowl. When people stopped growing their own, this dish quietly disappeared, and most Americans have never even heard of it. Number 16, lentil pottage. Long before lentils became a health food store darling, they were the cheapest way an immigrant family could put protein on the table. A cup of dried lentils, an onion, a carrot, and a pot of water. That was the whole thing. Lentils did not need soaking like other dried beans. They cooked in half an hour, breaking down into a thick, earthy pottage that stuck to your ribs and kept you full for hours. Old world families brought this to the tenements of New York and the factory towns of the Northeast, and it fed them for pennies a bowl. A pound of lentils cost about 11 cents and made enough to feed a family twice. We know now that lentils are loaded with protein, iron, and fiber, that they are as close to a perfect cheap food as exists. Our great-grandmothers knew none of the science. They just knew that a pot of lentils cost next to nothing, filled every stomach at the table, and never once let the family down when times were hard. First pattern break. Here is where the truth about beans gets bigger than the beans. Every dish on this list is really a story about arithmetic. A poor family did not choose beans because they loved them. They chose beans because a pound of dried beans cost a dime, swelled to 3 times its size in the pot, and delivered more protein per penny than any meat on the butcher's rack. Beans were survival wearing the disguise of supper. But here is the part nobody planned. Those same beans that kept families alive during the Depression turned out to be some of the healthiest food on earth. Fiber, protein, iron, folate, slow-burning energy that carried a man through a 12-hour shift. Our grandparents ate for pennies and, without knowing it, ate better than we do with our $40 grocery runs. Poverty forced them into a diet that doctors now recommend to the rich. There is a hard, quiet lesson buried in that pot of beans. Number 15, white beans and smoked sausage. When a family had a little money left over from a sausage, it went straight into a pot of great northern beans. Sliced smoked sausage, drained white beans, an onion, and enough water to bring it together, simmered for half an hour until the beans turned creamy and the broth ran smoky and rich. The sausage did double duty. Its fat and smoke seasoned the entire pot, so a single link flavored a meal for 4. A bag of great northern beans cost about a dime, and even a cheap ring of smoked sausage stretched across days when it was cut thin and cooked into beans. This was the one-pot supper that actually looked like a real dinner. You served it in a bowl, you tore off a piece of bread, and you felt like you had cooked something worth sitting down for. For a working family or a widow eating alone, that mattered. A meal that looks like a meal makes you feel like a person, not just someone getting by. Number 14. Cowboy beans. Out on the ranches and in the farm kitchens of the West, cowboy beans were pintos with muscle. You browned whatever scrap of ground beef you had, then dumped it into a pot of pinto beans with an onion, a can of tomatoes, a spoon of molasses, a little mustard, and enough chili powder to wake it up. Then it cooked down thick and sweet and smoky until a spoon stood up in it. The molasses gave it a deep caramel edge. The tiny bit of beef made the whole pot taste like it was mostly meat when it was mostly beans. For $1, this fed a bunkhouse or a family of 8. It traveled well, it reheated better than it started, and it held on the back of the stove through a long day of work. Cattle country ran on beans like this, one heavy, satisfying, penny-a-serving pot at a time. It has mostly been replaced by a can with a cartoon cowboy on the label, and something got lost in that trade. Number 13. Great Northern Bean and Ham Soup. Where navy beans made a soup the color of weak tea, Great Northern beans made something creamier, softer, almost velvet. After a holiday ham was picked clean, the bone went into a pot of soaked Great Northern beans with an onion, a couple of carrots, a rib of celery, and a bay leaf. Then it simmered half the afternoon until the beans burst and thickened the broth into a pale, rich soup that tasted like it took far more than it did. The ham bone was free, already paid for with Sunday's dinner. The beans cost $0.10. Everything else came from the garden or the root cellar. By the time it was ready, the kitchen smelled like a place someone loved you. The little shreds of ham that fell off the bone floated through the soup like a bonus, and a single pot fed a family for 2 or 3 days. This was the Sunday into Monday soup, the one that made a holiday last a week. Number 12. Bean and potato chowder. When even the ham bone was gone, Grandma reached for what was always in the house: a cup of white beans, 2 diced potatoes, an onion, a little milk, and salt. The potatoes broke down and thickened the broth. The beans gave it body and protein. A splash of canned, evaporated milk at the end turned the whole thing creamy without a drop of real cream. A pot of bean and potato chowder cost under 50 cents and filled every bowl at the table. For a senior with bad teeth or an aching jaw, it had another gift. It was soft. No chewing, nothing tough, just a warm, gentle, spoonable supper that went down easy on a cold night. The Depression generation quietly built their whole cooking style around what an old body could actually eat, and this chowder was part of that wisdom. It asked nothing of you but the patience to let it simmer, and it gave back warmth, comfort, and a full stomach for the price of pocket change. Number 11. Refried pinto beans. Along the Texas and New Mexico border, no pot of pintos ever fully died. When the beans were down to the last cup, Grandma heated a spoon of lard in a heavy skillet, dumped the beans in, and mashed them right there in the hot fat until they turned into a thick, savory paste with crispy browned edges. Spread on a warm tortilla or a slice of toast, sprinkled with a little cheese if there was any, this was breakfast, lunch, or supper. It cost nothing because the beans were leftovers and the lard was already on the stove. What the frying did was almost magic. It took plain, tired beans and gave them a deep, toasty, almost meaty richness that made them taste brand new. Mexican-American families passed this technique down through generations as everyday survival, not cuisine. Now the same dish sits on $10 plates at restaurants that call it authentic. It was authentic, all right. It was authentically what you did when you were too poor to waste a single bean. Second pattern break. Here is something the food companies never wanted you to notice. There is no money in a bag of beans. Think about it. A pound of dried pintos costs about $1 even today, and there is no brand loyalty, no advertising budget, no celebrity chef building a cookbook around a 10-cent ingredient. Nobody can mark up a bean the way they mark up a frozen dinner or a boxed skillet meal. That is exactly why you have never seen a glossy commercial for pinto beans and cornbread. The foods that kept our grandparents alive and independent are the foods that no corporation can get rich selling. So instead, they sold us convenience. They sold us the idea that we were too busy to soak a pot of beans overnight, that cooking from scratch was a burden we had finally escaped. And we believed them. We traded the cheapest, healthiest, most honest food in America for a box, and we called it progress. Number 10. Chili beans. Not the fancy competition chili with 3 kinds of dried peppers and hand-cut brisket. The poor man's kind. A pound of pinto or kidney beans, a small bit of ground beef if you could spare it, a can of tomatoes, an onion, chili powder, and salt. It simmered on the stove until the beans went soft, and the whole pot turned thick and red and warming. This was the ultimate batch meal. Make it Sunday, eat it Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and swear it tasted better every day. The beans did the heavy lifting, so a half pound of cheap meat fed a whole family. It cost about $1 for a pot that lasted most of a week. On a cold night, a bowl of chili beans with a piece of cornbread crumbled on top was pure comfort, cheap fuel that stuck to your ribs through the coldest part of winter. Church food banks packed the ingredients together in bags because they knew exactly who would make it and exactly how far it would stretch. Number 9. Split PEA soup with a ham bone. No dish on this whole list stretched farther than a pot of split pea soup. A bag of dried split peas cost about 9 cents. The ham bone came free from Sunday dinner. Everything else, an onion, a carrot, a bay leaf, came from the garden. The peas dissolved completely as they cooked, thickening the soup without any flour or cream, turning the broth a soft, earthy green. The ham bone released its collagen slowly, giving the soup a body that coated the spoon and warmed a person from the chest outward. You could feel it working. Children who would not touch a vegetable ate 2 bowls of this without blinking. Grandma made it on Sunday afternoon and fed the family from it clear through Tuesday. The whole batch cost around 30 cents. Hospitals served it, military mess halls served it, and school cafeterias served it because it was cheap, nourishing, and nearly impossible to ruin. You could walk away from the stove, forget it for 20 minutes, and it just got thicker. That forgiveness mattered in a busy kitchen. Number 8. Navy bean soup with a ham bone. If split pea was the everyday soup, navy bean soup was its plainer, prouder cousin, and it has a resume most home cooks would kill for. A bag of navy beans, a leftover ham bone, an onion, a rib of celery, and water. That was all. It simmered for hours until the beans burst and the starch thickened the broth into a creamy white soup that tasted far more complex than its handful of ingredients had any right to. Some folks added a splash of vinegar at the end to brighten it. Some dropped in a bay leaf. But the base recipe worked perfectly plain. Here is the part that stuns people. The United States Senate dining room has served navy bean soup every single day since 1903. It is on the menu right now, today. The reason is simple. It is cheap, it is filling, and every senator who ever grew up poor recognized it instantly as the taste of home. A 2-pound bag cost $1.50 and made enough soup to last a family an entire week. Number 7. Beans and greens. Here is the meal that fed the Kentucky miner's family every single day. A pot of white beans and a mess of greens cooked down together with a piece of salt pork. Great Northern or cannellini beans on one side, a heap of collards or turnip greens or mustard greens on the other, both simmered slow until the beans turned creamy and the greens went silky, and the whole thing sat in a dark, mineral-rich pot liquor. Italian families in the Northeast made a version with escarole. Southern families made it with collards. Both were poor, both were feeding a crowd on nothing, and both landed on the exact same brilliant idea. Beans gave you protein. Greens gave you iron, calcium, and folate. Salt pork gave you the fat and flavor that made a poor family eat like the food was rich. A whole pot cost well under $1. Nutritionists today would call this one of the most complete, cheap meals a human being can eat. The people who lived on it just called it dinner, and they raised strong children on it. Third, pattern break. Here is what nobody says out loud about these bean dinners. They were never really about the beans. They were about a woman standing at a stove, deciding that no matter how thin the money got, her family was going to eat tonight, and they were going to eat something warm. A pot of beans is patience made edible. You soak it the night before, planning ahead for a hunger that has not arrived yet. You let it simmer for hours, tending it between 100 other chores. And at the end, out of a dime's worth of dried beans and a scrap the butcher threw in for free, you set down a supper that fills the whole table. That is not just cooking, that is love doing math. That is a grandmother refusing one more day to let hard times win. Number 6. Black-eyed peas and hog jowl. Every Friday in kitchens from Baltimore to Birmingham, a piece of smoked hog jowl went into a pot of soaked black-eyed peas and simmered the better part of the afternoon. The jowl, the cheek of the pig, was one of the cheapest cuts on the whole animal, all fat and smoke and cartilage. But what it released into that pot over a few slow hours was extraordinary. The broth turned rust-colored and deeply smoky, and the peas drank it in until each one swelled full and split at the center. The little scraps of meat that fell from the jowl got shared out across the plates. A pound of black-eyed peas cost about 7 cents, and the jowl was nearly free. 2 of them fed a family for days. Down south, black-eyed peas were not just New Year's luck. They were a Wednesday night lifeline, the meal a family made on the first of the month when the check came in, buying enough dried peas and cheap pork to carry them clear to the next one. Number 5. Hoppin' John. In the low country of South Carolina and Georgia, Hoppin' John was tradition, superstition, and survival cooked down into a single pot. Black-eyed peas simmered with a smoked ham hock until they were soft, then tossed with long-grain white rice and seasoned with salt and a pinch of red pepper. The rice absorbed the smoky, earthy broth from the peas until every grain carried the whole flavor of the dish. Eaten on New Year's Day, it was supposed to bring good luck and money in the year ahead. But eaten on a plain Tuesday in February, because there was nothing else in the house, it brought something better. It brought dinner. Black-eyed peas cost 7 cents a pound. Rice was a pantry staple that stretched everything it touched. This one pot fed a large family for next to nothing and left them full and warm. Today, Hoppin' John shows up on restaurant menus as a proud Southern specialty. Back then, it was simply what poor, low-country families ate to stay alive, and they made it beautifully. Number 4. Red beans and rice. This was the Monday meal of New Orleans, born from a simple rhythm of the old days. Monday was wash day, an all-day chore, so a woman put a pot of red kidney beans on the back burner in the morning with a smoked sausage or a ham bone, an onion, a green pepper, and a stalk of celery, and let it cook low and slow while she scrubbed clothes for hours. By supper, the beans had turned creamy, the pork had given up its smoky soul to the broth, and it all went over a scoop of white rice. For a poor family, the beauty was that it minded itself. You put the pot on at noon and came back at 5. No stirring, no fussing, no standing over a hot stove. The beans did their own work, and the finished plate was so rich and so filling that you forgot you had spent under $3 on the whole pot. Louis Armstrong signed his letters, "Red beans and ricely yours." That was not a joke. That was a man who never forgot where his food came from. Number 3. Leather breeches. Here is the one almost nobody remembers. In the mountains of Appalachia, before freezers existed, families preserved their green beans by stringing them whole on a thread with a needle and hanging them from the rafters to dry all winter. They called them leather breeches or shuck beans, and when a cold January night came and the garden was long dead, Grandma pulled down a string of these shriveled leathery beans, soaked them, and cooked them low for hours with a piece of fat back. What came back to life in that pot was astonishing. The dried beans took on a deep, concentrated, almost nutty flavor that fresh beans never had, chewy and rich and unlike anything you can buy in a store. A whole winter's worth of vegetables hung drying from the ceiling for the cost of nothing but the labor of stringing them. This was survival cooking at its most ingenious, a way to eat green beans in the dead of winter, decades before a freezer aisle existed. Most Americans today have never heard the words leather breeches. That is our loss. Number 2, pinto beans and cornbread. If you understand this one dish, you understand how the mountain South ate for the better part of 2 centuries. A pot of pinto beans started the night before, soaked, then simmered all gee with a ham hock or a piece of salt pork, seasoned with nothing but salt and pepper. By supper, the beans had broken down at the edges, thickening the pot liquor into a dark, rich broth that tasted nothing like the canned beans in a store today. A cast-iron skillet of cornbread baked while the beans cooked. Then you crumbled the hot cornbread right into the beans and ate it all from a single bowl, maybe with a slice of raw onion on the side. In parts of Kentucky and Tennessee, this appeared on the table 5 or 6 nights a week. The beans cost 8 cents a pound. The ham hock was a scrap the butcher nearly gave away. This meal built the generations of Americans who worked the coal mines and the textile mills and never once asked for anything fancy. They did not need fancy. They had this. Number 1, a pot of beans. At the very top of this list is something so plain, so stripped of everything modern food culture values, that naming it almost feels like a letdown. Just beans. Not a regional version, not a named dish with a story attached. Dried beans, whatever kind was in the pantry, simmered in water with an onion, a bay leaf, and whatever scrap of cured pork could be found, cooked until the beans broke down and thickened the water into something that could carry a human being through a long winter on almost nothing. This is the meal that appears in every American oral history of poverty, from the Great Depression through the lean post-war years. In Appalachian mining towns, in Dust Bowl farm kitchens, in the tenements of Chicago and Cleveland, in the sharecropper cabins of the Mississippi Delta, a pot of beans was what kept families alive when everything else ran out. A pound of dried beans cost a dime and fed 6 people for 2 days. Nothing in the American kitchen has ever done more for less, and nothing has been more completely erased by the full supermarket that replaced it. This is the meal we should remember most. Try one this week, just one. Then tell me in the comments what you made, because these were never just cheap dinners, they were how our grandmothers turned almost nothing into enough.